last topic. I mean, we'll try to do our best. We are trying to make it, give you enough content, but at the same time also give you an overall understanding and a critique of the provisions. So we'll try to see how much we can pack into this session. So we are going to start the session today with a small exercise. Federalism, earlier we have mentioned to you about the division of the legislative powers, that what the center state can legislate upon, and what are the subject matters which all two can, both the center and the state can legislate upon. So we'll just put up a list. We'll divide you into 3 groups. We'll put up a list of all the subjects. We want each one of you to discuss in your respective groups as to whether a particular subject matter should ideally be legislated upon by the central government or by the state government, or should it be a power available to both? And what is the reason for you to come to that conclusion? So this is what we would like each one of you to discuss in your smaller breakup groups and come back to the plenary. And as always in the instructions, each one of you are required to somebody in the group should be the coordinator who will make notes and then present it. So these are the subject matters which each one of you should decide upon, whether this particular subject should be legislated upon by the state, by the center, or should both the center and the state have the power? And above all, why do you think so? I think that is what is most important. What is your rationale for thinking that a particular subject matter should be legislated upon only by the parliament or by the state or by both? So I mean, don't go into the constitution and see. We just want you all to think independently to see whether your thinking matches with that of the constitution makers. I mean, there is no right and wrong in this. Each one of us may have a different perspective on the whole issue, whether something it is more appropriate for the state to legislate or for the center to legislate. So, and Sainthan, would you also put it in the chat? Because when they go into the groups, will the screen be available?
No, I'll just put it in the chat while breaking them out in the rooms.
Yeah. So as always, Sainthan will assign you to the respective groups and we'll meet again in 15 minutes. Sainthan?
Yeah.
Yeah. So we are at 8:06. So at 8:20.
Any questions?
We'll reassemble. Any questions? Yeah, I suppose nobody has questions. We can proceed into the breakup group.
So I'm just posting the same list into the chat. I'll also post it into the WhatsApp group. And I'll break you out into rooms right now. Please join the room when you get the prompt, and we'll come back at 8:26.
Who's going first?
Room 2, shall I go or we wait for room 1?
No, there's no hierarchy. Anybody who starts can.
Okay,
go.
I will complete then. Do I first just mention as to what we went for, the consensus on each of those items, or
also the basis? What is the basis for which?
Okay, I think the basis we sort of got to at the end. And this was a conversation that, in fact, Barr came up with. He mentioned about pedagogy of the oppressed and how all the decisions have to come from the people. So he was talking about basically the utopian idea that you don't need a federal government or even a state government. It can come down to the base level of a people of a small locality. It could even be a small tribe. And they are the best ones to decide what is good for them. And there's no need for it to come from federal or state government. And overall, in most conversations, most of the items we did come up with state. One or two, it was mostly going towards federal went to foreign policy, to railways, overwhelmingly for trade and commerce. That was only me, nobody else spoke. Entertainment tax, disability, pension, water. These items mostly we felt it was federal, but most of the other things we definitely decided it has to be decided by the state. Our team had Shakti, Tha, Nandini, Satya, Sandeep, and Mohan. These guys also mentioned some other points. So, guys, if you want to specify on what we discussed, thanks.
You mentioned marriage, though, Muhammad. I was noticing. Marriage, agriculture, all that should be with the state.
Yeah, most of the things, the only ones I mentioned were the federal ones. Everything else we concluded on state.
Okay. Yeah.
Unanimously, most of the other items went to state.
Did you have any concurrent?
Yes, on the state, yes. On the state items, mostly everybody agreed upon what of the items which I didn't mention. All those went to state because we basically felt it has to come from within the people. We don't have, actually, if you want to specify, we were talking about education, archaeology. These two items were very heavily emphasized upon, and also on the taxing, the property tax, all those has to, any wealth that comes has to be decided by the people, including whenever issue comes, like on a disaster management. We've had recent issues where some states have had problem, but the central did not help out. So the people who are facing the difficulty must get the solution, and it has to come from within. Similarly, whatever produce and stuff that the state has, that must best be utilized for the state, and then they can decide if they want to contribute to the other states. The only place with regards to produce, it's this is not produce, but water. There was a conclusion that it has to be something shared by all of the states, and therefore that had to be federal.
Okay, the next group. I think, Mohammed, the question was, I think, did your group think about concurrent, which is that where both the center and the state can legislate? I think that was the question.
Those things, there were very few where there was a tilt between defense, because again, we were talking about what happened with Tamil Nadu when there was an issue with Sri Lanka. The national federal government thought differently versus the state people. So those are things has to be decided between the federal and the state government, because the state will specifically know what's right for them, because they'd possibly be bordering with some other country. So defense came that way. That's the one thing I can remember. Guys, if anybody else can remember on the concurring ones.
Am I hearing you that defense should be in the concurrent list?
Yes, sir. And the example was the what happened with Sri Lanka, where the Indian Army went into Sri Lanka. So the state also has to be able to decide whether we go in or not.
But India has 32 states.
Right.
Not just Tamil Nadu. So
Agree.
Archaeology also we discussed concurrent list.
No, archaeology overwhelmingly went to state. Most people decided on state. Like 3 versus 2 on archaeology.
okay, let's park it and go to the other groups.
I'll start, and please everybody join in because I'll miss a lot of things. I think what went to concurrent from our group was education, elections, banking, energy, disaster management, And there were a few things that we thought should go to the union, like defense, railways, medical education, disability, and overwhelmingly to the state was agriculture, archaeology, industrial policy, police. A few things that we discussed were how the power between the center and the state should be divided. So we were even considering whether it could be on the concurrent list with more power to the state or more power to the union as the item demands. So whether that itself was a possibility. Yeah. Can somebody else just fill in?
We had a discussion about marriages also, and we were just wondering if it should be state or union, because I mean, imagine having different marriage laws in different states, and for people from different states, under which state law would their marriage be registered? So that would, I mean, just a thought that it might be better if it was uh, controlled by the union, so that we can have an inclusive marriage policy for all religions, all sexual orientations, etc. But I don't know. It was just a discussion. We didn't really decide on which one we'd put it in. Just to add to what Tilo was saying.
And that industrial policies also should be restricted to the state, because then the state gets to decide what kind of policies, what kind of route they want to take towards industrialization. Similarly, for public transport, we had a discussion that it should actually remain with the state, and the union doesn't have much to do with how the state runs public transport. And to be wary of the idea that somebody else is more in charge, has a better idea than the people who are facing with the everyday.
Also, we had foreign policy and foreign policy. We had it under union, trade and commerce, because we assume that the union has a better understanding of which direction we need to go, or so then based on that they'll make better informed choices regarding foreign policy and trade and commerce. Just to add.
Okay, and in our group, to add, so center, we had defense, almost defense, foreign policy, income tax, and railways overwhelmingly get into the center alone. Under state, most of the participants felt that the police, industrial policy, public transport, property taxes, entertainment taxes should be a state subject. Concurrent, folks felt that election, disaster management, trade and commerce, disability, medical education should be concurrent subjects. In education, there was a good debate around how cannot have one curriculum fits all, because culture is very different at a local level. So schools should be a state subject, whereas higher education can be a central subject. There was quite a bit of conversation around marriage, whether that, and people were equally split on whether it should be a central subject or a state subject. And banking also, people were split on whether it should be a center or a state or concurrent. Pension also was equally split between concurrent and center. There were conversations around COVID, and there were conversations around marriage, and I would like other folks who express those opinions to share, especially around the COVID conversation and the marriage conversation. You could just share your thoughts that you expressed.
We'll have to move a little fast. I think one more group is to present. Murju. Have all the three groups presented?
Yes, all three done.
Yeah, this ours was the third. I think.
Okay, I think all of you have copies of the Constitution. Originally, we thought that after you finish, we'll go back to the 7th schedule to see, where the subject matters lie. But I think we don't have the time for that. All of you can do it independently. But just to tell you, it's not just you who have so many diverse opinions and confusions, because, several times subjects overlap, subject matters overlap, and there has been a dispute whether center or state is appropriate authority to legislate. Things have gone up to the Supreme Court. Supreme Court itself had a lot of, so evolved over time, criteria to decide whether a particular subject matter, because it's impossible to have an exhaustive list, and it's impossible to have a list which doesn't overlap. And so, then Supreme Court said we should not get tied down to the words, but look at the pith and substance. What was the intention? What is the overall, substance of an entire entry in the list? And depending on that, they decide whether it should fall under state or center. Just to give, this is all, just for food for thought. We can't now exhaustively deal with any of the points that you have raised. And as I said, please take time to see from what you have decided, how it compares to the list that is there in the 7th schedule. But the discussion on defense, for instance, there was a debate whether it should be center or maybe state. The Sri Lanka issue was formed where Tamil Nadu had a different opinion. But again, then visualize the scenario. Does it mean that every state can have its own army, navy, and air force? So is that feasible? So that is an aspect which you need to. Defense is definitely a state central subject. So again, foreign policy, many of you have agreed it should be center. Then education. There was a lot of debate over education. Currently, as far as Tamil Nadu is concerned, there is a lot of dissent over NEET, because the center appropriating the entire, the entrance exam, and each state saying that we should be able to determine, medical education, because the medical requirements of each state would be different. And so we would like to have our own admission policy and our own entrance test, so that, because ultimately health again is a state subject, state or concurrent. So as I said, there are a lot of opinions. There's no single thing which is right or wrong, but just to tell you that there is so much of a nuance to the whole issue of even to decide who should legislate on a particular subject, and what goes into deciding which, and concurrent. See, again, marriage, I think, was one more subject. Marriage falls, I think, in the concurrent list. All your Hindu Marriage Act, Hindu Succession Act, that is inheritance, anything to do with personal law, they are all state legislations. But when it comes in, central legislations, and when it comes to, when it is in the concurrent list, the advantage is that the state can also, bring in their state amendments to the central legislation. So that is the advantage of being in a concurrent list. For example, the Hindu Marriage Act. Somebody mentioned, I think in group 3 of which I was a part of, about how Tamil Nadu has what is called the self-respect marriage, which is a Swayamaryadai marriage, which is not actually found in any other state. Now, for instance, so a Swayamaryadai marriage is something which is without a bereft of all religious practices. It is some kind of a civil marriage. Don't mix it, don't confuse it with the Special Marriage Act. Special Marriage Act is again a central legislation, but that is for people belonging to two different religions. Inter-religious marriages can be registered under the Special Marriage Act, and the act of registration itself constitutes the marriage. That is, you conduct the marriage by way of registration. Whereas under the Hindu Marriage Act or any of the other personal laws, each religious, each state or each community because customary marriage is also recognized. Customary divorces are recognized in law. So again, you can bring in your state amendments to accommodate the regional practices or to bring in something which is different. For in the Hindu Succession Act, you had Andhra Pradesh and Tamil Nadu bringing in co-pasnary rights. That is, bringing in co-pasnary rights for women in the inheritance. Co-pasnary rights is in the inheritance for ancestral property. So far, inheritance of ancestral property is only through the male. Women never had a share. But the state amendments brought in equal share to the women, which is not there in many of the other states. I think Tamil Nadu, I don't know if Karnataka had followed suit later. So the entire issue of, now again, there is a debate about NIA, how police powers is slowly, the center is usurping the power. So that's a different debate altogether. But just to give you a broad overview as to when you're talking of federalism, we are looking at 2 and even 3 tiers, because one is the center, which is the union government and the parliament, then the state, and you also have the local body. So we are looking at a 3-tier federal system, and the whole, and lawmaking, legislation is one of the key factors of federalism. And so please spend more time in looking at the 7th schedule and see whether you agree, disagree. You will find even in the 7th schedule, they would say that, for instance, industry is in the state list, but there is a caveat to it. It says it's subject to 2 other entries in the first list, which is if it is an industry which is declared to be in public interest and defense, that goes into the union list. Otherwise, it is in the state list. So there is a lot more of detail and nuance. Just to give you a broad idea, we thought we'll just start with this exercise. So now we'll move on to the main topic, which is federalism in the Indian Constitution. And interestingly, all of you should know that nowhere in the Indian Constitution you will find the word federalism. But one has to look at the overall structure of the Constitution to read into the Constitution the principles of federalism. So we can start with Article 1 of the Constitution. The very first article. It begins with India, that is Bharat, shall be a union of states. So yes, the country is not just one monolith entity. It is comprising of several states. So this is the first recognition. The very first article in the Constitution recognizes the fact that we are a union of states, and the first schedule will delineate which are the territories. We need not go into that. Then please go to Article 3. 2, let's skip. Let's go directly to Article 3. Article 3, yes. Formation of new states and alteration of areas, boundaries, or names of existing states. And you please see the opening sentence. Parliament may by law. So the moment it says Parliament may by law, it means it necessarily excludes states. States cannot legislate upon it. So the center alone can legislate to form a new state, to increase the area of any state, diminish the area of any state, alter the boundaries, alter the name. So the recent controversy or the discussion or the debate around Article 370 and the status of Jammu and Kashmir is, current issue where this article has come into debate. I think the more discussions on it later on, depending on the time, Arvind will take through it. But just now, just to give you an overall framework about the provisions of the Constitution, where you could relate the principles of federalism. Now let's go into Article 11, which deals with citizenship. So Article 11 is part of Part 2, which deals with citizenship rights. And here again, the opening, Parliament to regulate the right of citizenship by law. So citizenship is part in the central list, and even assuming it doesn't find mention in the list, Article 11 is very explicit. It says as far as citizenship is concerned, it is the Parliament alone which can regulate the law of citizenship. Now, if you look at the scheme of the act, if you look, I mean, when each of you, when you have time, please look at the way the chapterization of the constitution itself takes place. So let's go to part 5 of the constitution. See, part 3 is fundamental rights. Part 4 is directive principles of state policy. 4A is fundamental duties. So all that we have done with. So now let's go to part 5. So part 5 is dealing with what is the union government. Now, so let's look at Article 79. So 79 looks at a bicameral house. So there shall be a parliament for the union which shall consist of the president and 2 houses to be known respectively as the Council of States and the House of People. Now, why is this important for federalism? Because who constitutes the Council of States? Because the House, this is the Lok Sabha and the Rajya Sabha. So the House of the People is the Lok Sabha, and MPs are elected directly by direct election. But what about the Council of States? Article 80, let's go to the next article. Article 80. So what is the composition of the Council of States? The Council of States shall consist of 12 members to be nominated by the President and not more than 238 representatives of the states and of the union territories. And who elects them? Each is the Legislative Assembly, the MLAs of each state, depending upon their strength, proportionately they elect members to the Rajya Sabha. So this is again inbuilt into the constitution is the federalism, where even in the center, even in the legislative process, even if the lawmaking power is given to the center, there is a state participation because every bill goes through both the Rajya Sabha. It should be passed by both the Lok Sabha and the Rajya Sabha. And the Rajya Sabha has representation of the state. Of course, if there is a, 2/3 or more majority in both the states by the same party, it's a different ball game altogether. But just to tell you that the scheme of the act, scheme of the constitution, the concept of federalism runs through the entire constitution. Then let's go to Article 107. So as I mentioned, now every bill that you need to pass except money bills. Let's not, money bills is a different subject matter that is about, the budget and but generally all laws, they can be introduced either in the Lok Sabha or the Rajya Sabha, but ultimately it has to be passed by both the houses if it has to become a law. So this principle that unless a bill is passed through both the houses, only then it can become the law of the land, is again fundamental to the federal structure of the constitution. Then while I don't want to go into the articles dealing with the judiciary, but having a judiciary which is independent and which is both at the central and the state, the Supreme Court and the high courts, both are constitutional authorities, both are independent, they are not under the state executive, and even the legislature cannot impinge on the independence of the judiciary because it is seen as the basic structure of the constitution. And the existence of an independent judiciary is again very important as a check on the powers of both the center and the state and to protect the federal structure of the constitution, because the Supreme Court, as part of the basic structure, has held that federalism and the federal structure is part of the basic structure of the constitution. So having an independent judiciary to arbitrate on all these and to decide in instances of dispute between state, center, or the citizen and the state, and the citizen and the center, it becomes a very important part of the federal structure. And I think just having a written constitution by itself, the very fact that our constitution very clearly spells out that, yes, these are the subjects on which the center can legislate. These are the subjects on which the state alone can legislate, which means the center cannot usurp the powers of the state. It cannot impinge upon the powers of the state. And these are the subjects where both center and state can legislate. All this is, since it's so clearly spelled out and it's written in black and white in the Constitution, it is again a very important feature of a federal structure where it is being preserved. Now, I just quickly look at 246 and 248, just to tell you what is the basis of the 7th schedule. I'm quickly running through it so that you just have an overview and just to have a feel of the provisions of the Constitution. Two 46. Then, okay, let's pause here. Let's look at part 9, Panchayats. So, Sayantan, since you're at that page, let me finish this. As I was mentioning, that this is the Constitution 73rd Amendment, which was brought in. It was not there in the original Constitution. But the third tier of the federal structure, which is the center, the state, and now the local bodies. So, part 9 includes the Panchayats, the municipalities also are brought into this. So, today, the local bodies are also part of the constitutional structure where a third tier of the government is being introduced. And so this is also part of the federal structure of the Constitution. Now, Article 246 is the one which provides for the fact that the state and the center will legislate as per the 7th schedule. And Article 248 is relevant. So, let's go to 248, Sayantan. Because 243 has so many. 248 is a residuary power. So if there is a subject matter which does not find mention in either in any of the lists, then the residuary power vests with the Parliament. There was a query, what happens if there's a conflict between the center and the state in a concurrent legislation? Supposing on the very same topic, both the center and the state legislate, then there is a procedure, because if supposing, for instance, for the Hindu Marriage Act, which is in the concurrent, which is a state enactment, but the subject matter of marriage and divorce, etc., is in the concurrent list. So the center has brought in a legislation, but the state brought in a state amendment. Now the state amendment, as part of the amendment process, it will need to get the assent of the president. So procedurally, a state amendment to a central act will have to require an assent of the president. And as long as it is not in contradiction to the central act, the state act will prevail. So there is Article 254, there's a lot of discussion on it, but broadly, as long as the state is not stepping on the shoes of a central provision, state can enact on the same subject matter, as long as it's not contradicting. Then I just want to mention the inconsistencies between the state and the center, Article 254. So this will, I don't want to go into the details, but as long as it's not inconsistent, state laws are also valid. If it is inconsistent, then the central law alone will prevail. Just to complete the picture for you, I just want to mention the other constitutional, one is the judiciary, which I have mentioned, and the other constitutional authorities, one is the Election Commission, Article 324. The Election Commission which is again very important for the federal structure, because who controls election? So the framers of the Constitution decided that it's neither the center nor the state who should control the elections, but it should be a body which is independent of both. So that is why we have the Election Commission, and the Election Commission of India is given the entire superintendence and direct control of the elections. This article has been interpreted in a very, very wide manner. Supreme Court has said that it is because ultimately the intention of the parliament of the constitution makers has to be recognized. And in Mohinder Singh Gill's case, the whole question is what are the powers of the election commission was discussed by the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court says that the election commission, as far as the conduct of election is concerned, has the widest of powers, and we cannot restrict those powers. So this constitutional body, being an independent body, is again a very important check to see that the federal structure is maintained and the center and the state are all kept in their places and one does not usurp the powers of the other. The other two are one is of the comptroller and auditor general. I don't want to take you to the provisions. It is articles 148 to 151. Those of you who are interested can look at it. But the comptroller and auditor general again is a constitutional authority which does an audit of all the central and the state accounts. So again, you have an independent body which will audit and which will critique how the funds of the governments are being spent. And this is again to ensure that the independence of the center and the state is protected, but at the same time, they are under an independent audit. Then the last part, before I hand it over to Arvind, is the fiscal federalism. I can't go into detail about it, but yes, the fiscal federalism, you have the finance commission. So all the revenues, we have the consolidated fund of India. All the revenues of the center are put in this consolidated fund. Then we have the finance commission, which is again a constitutional body. You have the Finance Commission Act. While yes, it is under the president, but generally it's a 6-year tenure. The Finance Commission meets, it has a chairperson and other members. The Finance Commission decides how the funds from the consolidated fund devolve on each state, and the grants in aid. What about the backward areas, regions which may require some more, finances for building infrastructure? So again, those are decided by the Finance Commission, which is an independent body. This has been somewhat watered down after the 279A, which is the GST Council. Because unlike the Finance Commission, the GST Council is headed by the Finance Minister. So the Finance Minister is controlling, though of course it has representation from the state finance commissions and finance ministers. But still the GST Council, the controversy surrounding the GST Council and the manner in which there is a dispute about the devolution of funds from the center to the state, which is actually subverting the entire constitutional scheme. But that is a larger debate. We can have an entire session on, fiscal federalism and whether it is actually working out or not. But this is again, it is the 101st constitutional amendment. The GST Council was brought in and the GST Act. So fiscal federalism is again a very, very important part of the constitutional scheme of things. So this is just to give you an overview of the various provisions to show you that federalism, while does not find mention in so many words, but inherent and inbuilt into the Constitution's framework is federalism. Now with that, I will hand it over to Arvind to take you briefly into the debate surrounding federalism in the Constituent Assembly.
Yeah, thanks, Saila. And what I thought I'll do in the little time that we have is to take you a little bit back to the discussions, the way we began it if you remember the first couple of sessions. We began by looking at the objectives resolution, which we said was the predecessor to the preamble. And the objective resolution as moved by Nehru at that time was really, it gave you a model of the state, right? The state that was envisaged at that moment in time. And what really intrigued me, I thought, was the presentations you guys made. Mohammad's first presentation, I think it's very close to the model of the state proposed in the objectives resolution. Again, think back, right? What is the model of state in the objectives resolution? That's the time before partition. What is the only way in which at that time the Muslim League would continue to remain within India? The only way the Muslim League would consent to being within India as per the cabinet mission plan is strong provinces, weak center. So the model, if you look at the objectives resolution, the model which Nehru puts forward reluctantly at that time is to say the center will take care of basically very few subjects, foreign affairs, defense, etc. The majority of powers vest with the states, and the residuary powers, what is not mentioned, also vests with the state. Mohammed, you got the perfect fit to the state as envisaged during the objectives resolution. But as we know, that's not the state that we have. What happened between the moving of the objectives resolution and the final draft of the constitution which emerges? What happened, of course, is partition, right? And partition happens, and with partition, the entire impetus or the imperative to have a weak center goes. And you see in a range of speeches in the Constituent Assembly, that from Nehru to, we don't have time to look at all of that, T.T. Krishnamachari, all of them, K. Munshi, all of them make the same point. They're saying that now that the Muslim League is not there anymore, we can have the form of state which we desire, which is a strong center. I wouldn't say weak states, but a different model of federalism. What Ambedkar calls a flexible federalism. That's the model that he says that we have. And again, the if we go back, right, go back a little bit to the debates in the Constituent Assembly. I remind you again of the opening speech and the closing speech of Ambedkar, and the question of federalism. It's very central, very, very central to the debates in the Constituent Assembly. When opening speech, what is Ambedkar presenting? He's presenting the outline of the Constitution, of the draft Constitution. What are one of the key features of the draft Constitution? The key features of the draft Constitution is what he calls the language of flexible federal arrangement. What does it mean by a flexible? Okay, firstly, why is it a federal at all? Right. The big criticism which he faces during the Constituent Assembly debates, everybody says states are nothing but municipal bodies. What federalism are you talking about? How is it even a federalism? When the residuary powers go back to the center, when the center, you saw the provisions Silas outlining at various points in time, the center can take over a state subject. During an emergency, the state becomes completely unitary. If two states decide that they want the center to legislate on a particular issue, the center can legislate on the issue. If the if the if the center says I'm going to legislate on this issue because it's in pursuance of a treaty obligation, you can legislate upon that issue. So the idea of a state subject is subject really to the overwhelming power of the center. All of this put together, our range of the members of the Constituent Assembly tell Ambedkar, or they make the point that you're not given us a federal setup. You've given us at best a municipality, and you call it a state. His response to that, again, it's a legal response. His response to that is going back to the discussion you had is 246, which is to say, when you say the state has certain exclusive power, certain powers of legislation, exclusive except in an emergency situation. We'll say exclusive, right? State list, concurrent list, and central list. Then, for all intents and purposes, at its heart, you have a federal setup. That's the argument that he put forward, right? And you pile up the arguments on the other side, what Sila referred to. What kind of a federal setup allows for you to demote a state to union territory? What kind of a federal setup allows for you to kind of say, hey, I'm going to demolish the boundaries of the state. I'm going to mix up two states together. You join two states together. I'm going to divide a state. What kind of federal setup allows you to do that? That's the question on the other side, and it's a very important question, particularly today. Why is it an important question today? Again, just very briefly, if you go to the Article 370 judgment, see, one part of it we can argue, debate, discuss around the entire question of 370, right? And that's is it a transitional provision? Is it part of the basic structure, etc.? Those debates we can have. But I think the most damaging, to me, again, we can have a debate on this. The most damaging part of that judgment is the fact that legitimizes the position that the center has unilaterally downgraded an existing state to a union territory and has split the state into two parts. How did the center derive these powers? You ask that question, we'll go back to Article 3, which allows for you to divide a state into allows for you to tamper with the boundaries of a state. Of course, I mean, there's a small technical point, which is the fact that you have to get the consent of the state legislative assembly before you split a state into two. For example, Telangana, Andhra, that's what happened. The Andhra Pradesh Assembly passed a resolution saying that we want to split into state A, Telangana and Andhra Pradesh. What is the argument in the case of Jammu and Kashmir? Jammu and Kashmir doesn't have a state legislative assembly because currently it's under president's rule. So the governor takes the role of governor takes the role of the legislative assembly. So in a sense, the governor agrees, or the governor gives his consent to the splitting up of the state into two parts, as it were. So again, you see, it's a big debate. It's a question of a legislative. How do you? Is it what kind of a federation is India? To me, the biggest challenge for India being a federal setup is this Article 3 provision, where the central government can unilaterally degrade a state to union territory. Of course, we could have to check on this kind of unlimited power of the union if we had a better judgment of the Supreme Court. If we had a judgment of the Supreme Court more cognizant of the idea that federalism is a part of the basic structure, and the union government cannot and must not have the authority to downgrade a state to union territory unilaterally. Unfortunately, the biggest failure of the Supreme Court on this matter is the fact that it allowed for an existing state for the first time in the history of India to be downgraded to a union territory. States have been split before, but a state downgraded to union territory, absolutely the first time that happens, right? And the Supreme Court was allowed for this kind of a exercise of power by the center. Okay, just getting back again. That's one point of Ambedkar's opening speech. One point was really this, right? The fact that it is a it is a it, it is a federal setup because you have the splitting a legislative power. That's the point which he makes quite strongly. The other thing he comes in very strongly on is a strong case for why we must have strong powers as far as the center is concerned. It's a very important point, actually. I think from today's perspective, we see it in a certain way, which is very important. But look at it from the perspective from 1946, 47 onwards, right? If you have, again, look at it this way. These are three examples he does give. If you have a weak center, then you can say that the question of land reforms may be very difficult to kind of push through, or maybe very difficult to even initiate, right? If you have a weak center, then the question of the prohibition of the practice of untouchability and legislation on that, again, will be very challenging. Every state may not be on board that particular position. The question of labor laws, again, could be very challenging, right? So his point is, you need these powers with the center. You need the center to initiate, or you need the union to initiate these kinds of changes in the structure of the state that we live in, right? If you have a strong provinces, this is a big argument. The lower down you go, right? Again, someday, I think Mohammed, again, sorry for picking on you again, but bringing your point to the fore again. Let local people decide. Okay, local people will decide. I'm just paraphrasing Ambedkar's viewpoint. His local people will decide. They'll decide on the basis of caste. What are you going to do then? There's a big challenge. Gandhi said local people decide. Ambedkar said no. Absolutely no. We must have a law from the top which mandates or prohibits the practice of untouchability. There's no question. That's the logic or the argument for a strong center. Again, the point is this, right? The lower you go down in the state hierarchy, the more bound you are by the norms of caste. The only way you can challenge it is from the higher up on the hierarchy of the state. So that's one argument which is put forward for a stronger, as it were, center, as it were, from Ambedkar's viewpoint. Sorry, some questions which were there. Somebody was saying.
I was just giving examples of
Okay.
states. that fit.
You want to come in, Suresh? Please do come in.
No, I'll come in. I think one of the issues that Arvind is pointing out is the fact that, see, we have to understand why the notion of federalism was discussed at that time. Like Saila had said, the word federal was not used anywhere in the Constituent Assembly or in the Constitution. But the principles of federalism was discussed. And part of it goes to the 1935 Act, which had a discussion about the center and a state, because India is made up of so many states. And one of the compulsions that was there, amongst other issues, was the fact that different princely states wanted to go in different ways. For example, Jamnagar wanted to join Pakistan, Hyderabad wanted to go separately. Some other princely states went separately. So the challenge was, how do you therefore create a unified nation called India, in which there is also independent states? So that's how the whole debate on federalism and unitary character comes in. And you had to allow for pluralism. So cultural, social pluralism existed throughout the country, and therefore you needed to have it. So it was arising out of this compulsion and the need that the whole discussion came about, which finally ended up in the lists. Go ahead, Arun.
Can I ask a quick question here?
Yeah.
So how does this then go in line with, say, something similar to a right to self-determination? Like right to self-determination or self-governance. On one hand, you want a strong center or a strong state to sort of enforce certain guidelines or keep the boundaries intact. On the other hand, you also want self-governance to emerge. So how does it get balanced basically? Right to self-determination in the presence of a strong state.
Self-determination is different from self-governance.
Okay.
Self-determination as a political concept means something else. Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
Well, I think it's a good question. I think it's a tough question to also answer, right? And if you take Jammu and Kashmir, for example, one of the arguments, right, why, which was put forward, again, you read the book, Dismantled State, you see that the one of the person, Anuradha Bhasin speaks to, one of the early members of the Jammu and Kashmir Constituent Assembly, etc. The point he makes is one of the reasons why we were keen on not going with Pakistan at that time is because we were very interested in taking forward land reforms. We felt that land reforms, there's a greater potential within the Indian context and Pakistani context because they saw it within the framework of class, as it were. Right? So the point in this case is Kashmir's problem is again the entire question of 317-35 is 35A is that we want to challenge or change the social and the economic structure of our society. And we're concerned that being a part of either India or Pakistan could compromise that. Therefore, 370 and 35A are very critical as far as that entire process of taking forward the question of land reform is. So there, for example, the question of self-determination and progressiveness seems to come together. But in other contexts, if you take many other states, it might be the very opposite. I would say how many states, if you put a counterfactual, how many states or would any state in the Indian Union at all have said that we want a provision like Article 17 to prohibit the practice of untouchability? That's a big question you have, right? How many states would have taken forward the question of affirmative action or reservation? All this, came from the top down, absolutely top down, in terms of the entire question of the fact that we had a progressive grouping, which was there at the very top, which said this is what we want, right? As far as the state that we're thinking of, that we want to bring into being, be it from Nehru's again. If you see the Madhav Khosla piece which I circulated, from Nehru's perspective, the entire question of land reforms, the entire question of economic inequality is the question he was concerned about. From Ambedkar's perspective, economic inequality to an extent, but caste inequality is the question he was very deeply concerned about, right? And these are questions which it might have been very challenging if you said, okay, let each state decide. Each state may decide to have a law on Article 17 or law akin to Article 17, may not. You may get a highly uneven state, you get, right? As far as the fundamental rights in each potential state are concerned. So I'm wishing a caution, right? From the point of view of the constituents, from the point of view of that time, think it's not all great to say it must be a federal setup. Let the states decide. So I think the Mohammed kind of framework, where let's decide everything at that moment in time, might have been the worst possible solution. Today, it's an interesting question. It's an interesting question. Today, what is the best possible solution? Is it different from the perspective of, I think, from Tamil Nadu, which is what he was articulating? Is it different from the perspective of UP or Bihar, or do different states see it very differently on the entire question of federalism? Right, and federalism also relies on the fact that you want to put in something, right? You think there's some value in coming together as a union. If you think there's no value, then you take that position of which the Muslim League took at that particular moment in time, saying that no, we want to keep as much out of this union as possible, right? And the union again links up again to the imagination of the constitution, right? You think you're coming together because you believe that the certain fundamental rights which the constitution guarantees to all persons, and that's the framework under which you want to live. You want to live under a framework which prohibits discrimination on grounds of caste, on grounds of gender, etc. Right? And that's the framework to which I mean, speaking from the perspective of the then Constituent Assembly, that's the allegiance. That's the framework to which you want to owe allegiance. Not necessarily linguistic identity, not necessarily an identity based on region or space, but you look at the preamble again. But you want to owe allegiance to a framework which basically guarantees you uh, these fundamental rights, and which guarantees the fact of a state which is based on justice, social, economic, political, etc. Right? That's the framework you want to bring into being. So you're not looking at it in particularities. You're not saying we're governed by the question of the language or the region we come from, but your framework is a more abstract framework of the constitution to which you owe your allegiance. That's the way the framers envisage the setup. And within that notion, you have the notion of the federal setup. Again, you go back to the Constituent Assembly. It was not all, shall we say, though Nehru was very clear that this opened up the question of a strong center. He also made the point that if we have a center uh, which is unitary, government which is unitary, it'll be very damaging. Right? It has to be a federation, federal setup. That commitment was there as well. Right? So I think again, that's where the debate, if you look at the debate which the Constituent Assembly goes quite detailed, the argument is it's not a federation where the units come together and give up a certain part of the center. It's a different kind of a setup where the units have an independent existence. But at the same time, they're in a way they're under the Union of India. What I think the language they use is it's an indestructible union of destructible states, right? And that's your Article 3 problem, right? The fact that the states are destructible, right? So it's a very different imagination which we have under the Indian Constitution. But the big gap which we haven't referred to, of course, is the judicial interpretation question, right? How has this notion of federalism been interpreted over a period of time through judicial interpretation, right? And the SR Bommai kind of a framework again gives you some level of a leeway, saying that which is the other important constitutional framework we'll look at, which is the question of, the dismissal, right? The dismissal of governments by the union, the dismissal of state governments by the union. Again, the SR Bommai lays down the fact that it has to be based on satisfaction, based on some material which the president may have before you impose president's rule. Right? But again, this is the framework. There's a question of judicial interpretation. The question of judicial interpretation, which is deeply disappointing in terms of its ability to safeguard the rights of the rights of states. So I think that the contemporary discussion as well, I think, is a big issue in terms of how we can think of a range of cases in which we have where it's very challenging in terms of what has been done as well by the Supreme Court in terms of protecting the rights of states. We can look at of course, the range of ways, right? Be it the status of Delhi, right, where again the court has really failed in terms of ensuring a protection to a quasi-federal setup, and of course the big question of Kashmir. Right? So yeah, that's just end with that.
Are there any questions you all want to ask, Arvind, so far? So before we move into the next part. So much of what you all discussed in the three groups was also what was discussed in the Constituent Assembly in terms of where.
Suresh,
Yes.
Arvind has said that the reasons why Ambedkar wanted a strong center, so Ambedkar worried about abolishing the untouchability. So if the power resides with states, the states may not, many of the states may not be willing to have Article 17. So it's true that even today, if we want to create any act like the act against honor killing, it is in fact not very easy in state government. Such laws can be created in center. So central government, to some extent, it protects the rights of Dalits. And I also gone through the document you have sent on that 30 pages document, how modernization and centralization, relationship between modernization and centralization. And I have one question. This state being a modern nation state, a mere mere through laws, so the social transformation, can it happen if it's not a pre-modern state like monarchy or something? It's a modern nation state. It's a nation state. So the social process of transformation, can it happen by mere a state with powerful laws or constitutions? So now we have a Dowry Act, but the act is not implemented in the society. So the culture of the political culture of the society determines finally the way the act constitution works in a society. So this assumption of creating a powerful center to democratically or emancipate the society through laws, is it in fact out of our own experience of 70 years, is it really true? How far we have achieved through this powerful center with respect to even caste also?
Go ahead, Arvind. I'll come
I
next.
think that's a great question, really a great question. And I think one way to answer that is to try and see how we can find a balance, right, between the idea of a center which is empowered to enact certain laws and a states which can also come in on the process, right? And if you remember, Sila referenced the fact that when certain subjects are on the concurrent list, both the center can enact laws and the state can enact amendments, as you all discussed in your group, right? The progressive amendment to the Hindu Marriage Act didn't come from the center; it came from the state. The self-respect marriage, which I think you referenced, right, is a Tamil Nadu enactment. It's not there in any other state, right? The idea that you don't need to go with I think the 7 steps, right? You don't need to go to the Saptapadi to get married, and you can actually get married by exchange of garlands. Isn't that?
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah. That's Tamil Nadu enactment. So again, right? I mean, that was said at that moment in time. Just you have to keep that in mind. At that moment in time, the pressures of those particular circumstances, where you felt that you were timid in doing anything, right? In terms of the strong provinces kind of a framework at that particular moment in time, and of course you take in account at that moment in time also the range of people who were there, right, in the Constituent Assembly, in terms of the range of incredible talent we had in the Constituent Assembly, which was making this particular case. Even then, the case they made is for a federal setup. It's not for a unitary setup. That's the point to be kept in mind. And the with respect to the Article 17 question, the point is, if you see Article 17 read with, I think, Article 35, right, which says that the center can enact a law on the question of caste atrocity, as it were. They reserve that power to themselves. It may not have come in every state. It could have come in certain states. Again, see, this is we'll go back to the history, right, of temple entry itself, right? Prior to the coming into place of 25, you had different states enacting laws with respect to temple entry. Again, very weak, inadequate laws, but different states enacted laws. And it became a kind of a one state will enact, the next state will enact. So that's the way the process really happened, right? And so it's possible that you might have some states which were more progressive, some states were less progressive. That's one kind of a point. Second point, of course, is that we should try and find a balance, I think, try and find a balance between the question of, uh, all-powerful center and a non-powerful and a center where there's no power at whatsoever, right? How do you find that balance in your imagination of the of uh, of the form of federalism is important. And here, one more concept I'll just mention and leave it at that is the idea that uh, India is the other point which has been put forward is India is a setup which is not just a federal setup but is a model based on asymmetric federalism, right? Asymmetric federalism, by which I mean not every state is related in the same way to the center. That's the argument for Jammu and Kashmir. Because of the history of its accession, the powers that it has, or the powers that it has, are different because of 370 from the from other states in the Indian Union. If you look at 371 A to H, right? States from the northeast, Nagaland, Manipur, etc. Again, it's a differential relationship of powers the states have, which will be tribal land, etc. Right? So there's a ways in which that you have to factor in. Again, even when you say strong center, you have to factor in the fact that states have a certain uniqueness as well, and there's a way in which that the ability for states to legislate must also be factored into your understanding of a federalism. So I think the argument end of the day is that you have a federal setup with a strong center, but undoubtedly it's still a federal setup, right? That's very important. The powers vest with the state on legislating on a range of subjects, and those powers should be preserved even as we speak today.
Sendil, I would I mean, just adding on to Arvind, but looking at it from a different location, would be to say that what Ambedkar had proposed on the day that he introduced the final version of the Constitution was to say that the soil of Indian democracy did not know equality, etc., etc. The soil is innately undemocratic, but the Constitution talks about certain democratic values as an ethic, which will have to be the morality that the new India should cultivate. Okay, so what he was essentially talking about is that these are very idealistic principles that we want for a future India, which in 1949 was not there. But the fact that it was not there should not stop the new nation from wanting to dream about what should be there. And that's how they introduced Article 17, Article 14, 15. And if you see the language is not the language of the generosity of the elite class, but the language of human rights, because you're born as human beings, flowing from the UDHR. We discussed all of this in earlier times. Now, with keeping this in mind, when you look at the whole issue of a strong center and what has happened subsequently, the question is it the problem of a strong center or is it the problem of how politics has evolved? And these are two separate things. Okay. Now, for about 30, 40 years, the dynamics between a strong center and emerging states, for example, between 1950 to 1967, when for the first time 7 state governments threw out the Congress and brought in new regional setups. So from 1967 till about say mid 1990s was the next phase when a lot of experimentation take place. Then from mid 90s to 2014 was one phase, and then 2014 until now is the last phase altogether. Now we are living in a phase in which there is a center which is usurping all the powers of the state to itself, taking over all the powers of the state to itself by a variety of means, both fair and foul. And today they are able to push through one nation, one election, one nation, one language, one nation, one one food, one nation, and so on and so forth. Okay, so it's also in a way a reflection of the type of politics that has emerged, which did not keep in pace with the type of possibilities that a strong federal structure offered. Okay. So I would tend to look at it in that sense. I'm asking a counter question. If we did not have it the way we have it now, what would have been the state of India today? If we did not have fundamental rights guaranteed to us, irrespective of caste, community, creed, language, gender, where would we be today? I mean, it's scary to think about it. Though it's coming, it's still not come. But I would like to then say, if we did not have this type of a federal type of a framework, what would be the situation today? Putting it differently, what type of an alternative federalism can we think of?
Comrade Suresh, you are right, because as Ambedkar said, if it had not been a powerful center in the beginning, it would have been some 500 provinces like that. There is a monarchical rule here. But Singaravelu, he has a vision of, he died before independence, but he said that it should be an evolving federalism.
Yeah.
So I would say until 1956, there is one phase. And it should be an evolving federalism, slowly devolving powers to the states. But unfortunately, that will not align with the class interest, ruling class interest of this country. So it went in the other direction. So it is consolidating powers in the center. It is not devolving powers over the last 70 years. So that is what I see. So anyway, whatever happened in the past with respect to getting out of this rule of monarchy, all those things, and we have accomplished certain things. But still, the question of democracy, federalism is a question of not an administrative question; it's a question of democracy. Ambedkar said it cannot be. It could be a union. It cannot be federation in the Constitutional Assembly debate. He said because this is not provinces joined together to form a center as in United States. Whereas Rahul Gandhi today in a conference in Paris, he said that I'm going to visualize India as a European Union, like federation of states. So now I think we have reached a stage where India should be a federation of various states. Earlier it is a union, as Ambedkar said, but now we have grown up economically, and there is a reasonable capitalist development, and people have practiced democracy. So it should be like a federation of, we should visualize, reimagine India in a different way, I suppose.
Yeah, Vinay, Geetakshi, I think Mohammed also had a thing. When they are raised questions. Go ahead, Geetakshi. Vinay.
Yeah, so one question is the context of federalism from the times, especially in 1949. The major concern perhaps would have been the fear of secession of these states and just to keep them together. But today we don't have to see federalism in that lens. We've come this distance. So, how much do you think Ambedkar's push for strong center was coming from the fact that it needed that power to keep the states together, rather than other factors? Was that do you think that could have been the overwhelming factor, or?
I still think, right? I mean, you go back to the objective resolution. No, not objective resolution. I think the opening speech or the closing speech, I can find it, where he makes the point that a strong center is a place of pride and refuge, as far as I'm concerned, right? And the word refuge I thought was interesting. So the sense that you think of the center as a refuge in terms of the entire question of caste. That's really the way I read it, right? So I think it's much more than the question of the linguistic question of law. It's a question of how do you craft an imagination of the state, right? And how do you ensure that the imagination of the state occurs across the length and breadth of the diversity of the country. Again, you go back, right? You go back to his work, later work, right? The case for Pakistan, right? Where he's doing a kind of he's doing a for and against, as it were, right? And you can see implicit in that entire question is fine, right? Counterfactual. If you had not conceded the question of Pakistan, what would be the form of state that you had? Right? The form of state would go back to the a weak center, strong provinces. That would be the model that you have. Right? If that is the model that you have, then it would be a very different world, right? In terms of the question of rights, which Suresh just put forward, which you have today, you might not have had the same kind of framework of rights today, as it were. So I think it's very closely linked to the notion of the kind of state that you have. And the kind of state that you have, again, going back to the imagination, not a state which gives a lot of power, a lot of autonomy to the provinces, because it believes that we need to transform or change existing social relationships, be it of caste or be it of economic. That's the model of the state. Of course, it believes in this transformational change without going down the, again, going back to the opening speech or the closing speech, without going down the route of, within quotes, either socialism or communism. So it's change within the framework of democracy, right? But it's change. And change means that you have to, right? There's no question of you do what you want. You do what you want within the limits put forward of the constitution, which reserves the question of fundamental rights as far as all persons are concerned, and the question of non-discrimination on a range of these factors, including caste, gender, religion, etc.
Geetakshi,
Yeah, my question, I feel is a bit abstract, but I'll put it here regardless. I was thinking, how did the Constitution make us think of citizenship when they were talking about federalism? Because everyone is a citizen of India, but like by virtue of something being in the state list and like different laws being constructed for it, did they feel the experience of citizenship for people in different states would be different? I mean, of course, most pressing matters would be in the union list, but did this come up?
It came up. It came up. If you again just go back and read the opening speech, Ambedkar's opening speech, right? And he discusses this in particular. He says, see, the United States is a federal setup because you can have different sets of laws at the level of the state and different sets of laws at the level of the union, right? And it's not a uh, unified setup. Whereas in India, right, you have a single citizenship for all persons in every state. There's no model of two citizens. There's one citizenship is Indian citizenship. That's point one. Secondly, the idea that you can, as a citizen, right, you can move from state A to state B or state B to state C, and you guarantee the question of non-discrimination, right? So again, that's a question that there's a certain way in which it's not a setup where you can discriminate on grounds of uh, the state that you come from. So again, you see the unitary bias or the bias in terms of the legal framework, right? So it's not a dual citizen, it's not a dual framework, but it's a unitary framework, right? And that again, going back again, I'll make this point as well. You go back to the opening speech. He again makes the point that see the think of the he puts it think of the complication and the confusion you'll have if every state had its own laws on marriage, had its own laws on transfer of property, had its own laws on contract. Instead, we have the civil codes which regulate your relationships across the length and breadth of the country, right? And of course, there's the possibility of state amendments, but state amendments again it's amendments come within the framework of the existing law, right? It's not a new law, right? It comes within the framework of the existing law. Right? So the model which he was putting forward is the unitary state with a certain kind of features, with certain kind of a federal features as it were. On these points.
Okay, thank you.
Mohammed, you had some question about Kashmir and AFSPA.
Oh, no, sir. That was just a thought that came on Kashmir. But the question, not question, it was more of a thought.
Yeah.
Now, when you look at it in the same angle, what happened with the Naxals? They call Naxals for people who are the local people. And then the government is sending people, if the defense was of the locals, I don't think the locals would allow their own people to get killed. And the flip side to that is what happened in Gujarat. When during the 2002 riots, the cops were letting the people get killed and etc. Mayhem was happening. So the central government then sends the armed forces, and then the state government does not allow the armed forces to work. So both ways, I was just thinking about both angles, and it was like a paradox. No, couldn't come with the answer to it. Just a thought.
No, which is exactly what has been happening, where you had the political representations in the state and the center being very varied. Unlike now, where 25 states have only the same party as which is the ruling party in the center. Okay, the very few states which have non-BJP governments in the country. In 2002, it was the Congress which was in the center, and no, it was not Congress. It was Vajpayee, again a BJP person at the center, and you had Narendra Modi as a chief minister of the state. And if you remember, Vajpayee had made a very strong statement about Narendra Modi, but within a day or 2 days, he was forced to retract because of the pressure of the RSS from inside. But I'm saying these pulls and pressures are part of a democratic process. Now we'll have to look at that separately from the legal mechanism that has been created. See, ultimately, law gets life only by the people who operate the law. For example, one thing that we should share is that India has no shortage of laws to protect people. The problem is not the law. The problem is the implementation of the law. In the implementation is where the human agency comes in. And in human agency is where caste, community, language, tribe, and other identities and partialities come inside. So do we say, therefore, that the law is bad, or do we say that the people implementing the law are not doing a good job? I think that's one thing that we need to keep in mind when discussing the federalism issue. I'm not saying that it's an ideal situation, but given the situation at that time and how it has worked out, it still allows us space for us to intervene. Vikash has raised his hand.
Yeah, I just had a question to what you said right now, sir. So you said plenty of laws are there, but in the implementation is where the issue comes in, because human agency. But laws are also made by human beings, and wouldn't they also represent interests of certain sections, because the same problems of caste, gender, etc., apply there as well? Because in the framing of the laws also, the human agency is going to be going in.
Absolutely. Laws are political in a sense. Law represents a political vision. Now, at a particular point in time in history, which forces shape that law, which forces have greater push and greater pressure in terms of bringing out the law becomes very important.
Okay. So only other point
now the constraint that is there now, for example, with the present dispensation, is the Constitution. The Constitution has now provided a broad framework which they are not able to get over. So one way to there are two ways. Either you throw out the Constitution and say that, we will not, we don't want this Constitution, okay, and create a new structure, or you keep the Constitution as a framework, but you subvert it from inside. You make it unworkable. Okay, so both of these things are happening. So you are right, Vikash. Of course, human agency is there even in the formation of laws, but there's always a gap between when a law is formed and later on when the laws are changed. Okay, and that gap is where politics comes in. Yeah, Arvind.
I'll just add one point to that. Is how do you think of the law in relation to a larger public opinion, right? And the way you think of the law, one way of thinking of the law is it can act as a constraint on what public opinion may want to do. So that's the idea of the what you call law is a imagination of law as a counter majoritarian institution. What Suresh and Saila just indicated is human agency. What you're saying, you may say that I just want to kill people of a certain grouping, whatever the grouping may be. But there's a law as far as murder is concerned. There's the Constitution as far as the right to life is concerned. All of which impose limitations on what you might want to do as far as human agency, as far as your public opinion is concerned. So the law always acts as a constraint on unrestrained ability to be majoritarian or to go with a majoritarian prejudice or a majoritarian belief. So which is why which is why we're having this course, right? Saying how can the Constitution and the law function as a limit to the unrestrained play of public opinion, whatever the public opinion may be.
Vikash, let me give you an example. 2015-16, see, 2013, the then Congress government came up with this law relating to land acquisition and displacement, the compensation for land that was acquired. It had some very progressive features. There was a lot of problem when the law came in. We all fought it from the PUCL. We fought the then structure of the law, but it sort of came up as a compromise type of a law. 2015, after the BJP came to power, they wanted to change the law. They wanted to change the entire provision of the law to suit certain industrial interests. At that point in time, the farmers movement, the Dalit movement, peasant movement, various other movements came together to oppose. And they had to beat a retreat in 2015 and 2016. Okay. Now, they have still not managed to change the law the way they wanted, which is to throw out that law. That's one example. Around the same time, the same government came up with a law codifying labor laws. Okay. At that point in time, the labor movement, including the RSS BJP-based labor movement, came together to fight it. That was not passed, 2015, 16, 17. Now, 2022, 2023, okay, and then last year also, the trade union movement has become very weak across the country. Okay, though they are here and there, they're making noise. Overall, they were very much less in terms of impact. Now they brought in this 4 codes, the labor codes. They've been able to push it in with not much of opposition from the organized trade union from across the country. Okay, this is the point here being that ultimately many of these things are also reflecting base level political processes. One of the reasons why we are holding this course is also to make sure that all of us who are attending the course also realize that it's not important only to understand the constitution. We need to do something to express and show why we will fight for this constitution in our own ways. Doesn't mean everybody has to come to the streets, but in our own way, can we carry on the fight to safeguard the constitution?
I have something, this Satya here. To one point that there are 2 things I want to say. One thing that Suresh just mentioned about Land Acquisition Act, though the union government could not make changes, the state governments, especially led by the BJP governments, made lots of changes, and they brought back much worse, included much worse conditions into the act. And later, when, for example, in Karnataka, when the Congress government came again in the state, they didn't change because it suited their political aspirations and whatever. So that's one point. The other thing is, like, again, when Suresh was saying, in the current dispensation, the union government is finding all ways to acquire more power through constitutional means only. They've done it, for example, GST or abrogation of Article 370 and many more. There are quite a few of them. Demonetization, trying to bring in one nation, one election, all that. Similarly, my question is, aren't there any constitutional means for the states to use to uphold their, I don't know if this is the right word, uphold their own sovereignty or their interests against the unions, this thing, and are the states doing it already through constitutional means? If there are any state that is doing it, can we have some examples?
Okay, I mean that's a really very good, very interesting question. Are states opposing the move to centralize everything? I think that's a point that you're raising.
Yeah.
Tamil Nadu has opposed NEET.
Yeah.
Okay. Tamil Nadu has also opposed the 3 new criminal laws. Okay. West Bengal has opposed the 3 criminal laws. They filed writ petitions. It is happening here and there, but that's the point that Vikash was saying, that ultimately it is also class interest behind regional parties. Okay, that also determines which issues they tackle and how they take. Saila tells me about how even on the GST rates, some of the states have gone to courts, and on the larger GST structure itself, the GST commission itself. So there are states which have challenged the move to centralize all these laws. They are not as much as we would like it to, but it's not as though there is no response at all. Okay. Now, unfortunately, what happens, Satya, is that being a practicing lawyer myself, and most of us here, some of us here are lawyers, even the courts respond to the type of public opinion and the public mobilization on issues. You see, and it's a hard reality, it's a hard fact of life, but that's the way it is. Now, largely on many of these issues, there is no major public outcry. For example, the prices of petrol keeps rising and rising and rising. Nothing is happening. So what is the government which is raising the prices of petrol go think of? Okay, nobody is opposing it. So let's keep going on. In the 80s, when I became a political activist and I was working, even a 5 paise increase in gas, 5 paise increase in petrol would bring together a slowdown or a complete closing down of an entire city. Now nothing is happening. Look at the price of petrol, diesel. Look at prices of gas. Look at all around. Prices have not come down at all in the last 5 to 6 years at all. So in a way, courts also are responding to the fact that public at large is now not bothered. That is one part of the picture. Other part of the picture is still the constitution, the basic structure, and some of the other things that are that we all hold dear are still there. That gives us a handle to fight it. Okay, so that is for example, the Places of Worship Act from the PUCL. We've just 3 days back, filed an intervention petition in the Supreme Court, where one person who generally files in support of right-wing causes has filed a petition, SLP, asking for the striking down of the Places of Worship Act. I hope you all know that Places of Worship Act was brought in 1991 by the then government to say that all temples, all places of worship as of 1947 will be frozen, and no new place would be taken up by any court. Okay. Now, in the Ram Janmabhoomi case, the Ayodhya judgment was given in 2017. The 5-judge bench said this is the only exception we are making, and no exception will be made. Now, the person who actually wrote it but did not acknowledge it, he wrote it was Chandrachud, as is widely understood by everybody. Chandrachud himself made the first change when the Gyanvapi issue came up from UP. And he said the law does not in any way say that there can be no scientific study. Okay, and that's how it went on until about 2 months back. The present Chief Justice of India said, no question of going ahead with the study and all that. There's a stay given on that. The point that I'm trying to say is that ultimately many of these things are all political issues, and these political issues predominate in terms of how it goes. But while that is true, it is equally true that the Constitution and the earlier interpretations of the Constitution, I think Arvind took us through a great length through the Keshavananda Bharati case, and then the ADM Jabalpur case, and why it is important that we understand these the concepts which emerged from that, the basic structure doctrine and various other issues. They still remain, and they still are very sound legal democratic arguments that we can have. But the question is, we need to now take it to the people. We need to take it to movements. Movements need to take it to their memberships, so that there's a greater talk about this. And it has to become part of our regular political language. The constitutional analytical language has to become part of our discourse, has to become part of our political argumentation, political language. That's when it will start making a resonance with people.
Thank you for the elaborate answer, and I assure you that it has made us all more sensitive to what's happening around us, to look through the lens of Constitution. At least to me, as whenever I read any news item, I try to see where is the Constitution, what does it say about this in everyday matters. Thank you.
Thank you. See, the subject is a huge subject on the federalism thing. There's lots of issues to be talked about, including contemporary issues. In fact, Saila, Arvind, and Sayantan were talking about this today. Number of issues kept coming up, but within a framework of 2 hours. And also, many of you have told us that you enjoyed the small group discussion. So we had to fit in. We had a difference amongst ourselves. Should we give in only content first and then have discussions later, or should we have a group exercise in the beginning and then get into this? It's one of those chicken and egg things which you can never resolve. But we hope you got a flavor of it. We can come back again. We can have smaller quorums to discuss this, and we can take the discussion forward. So there's a limit to what we could do within 2 hours. We hope you all have found it interesting and useful.
Thing which I'm sure.
Good, Mohammed, you keep pushing us. Don't worry. Keep pushing us.
Sure. But no, I saw a couple of yawns, and therefore I'll be quick. Sir, I'm sure Barefoot will be happy to hear a program that happened this morning. I discussed with Vikash on the idea, and this morning for the first time, APCR usually conducts some lectures and conversations with school kids and college kids. That usually becomes that one-dimensional, lecture that some senior lawyer comes and he'll be talking for about 45 minutes. And I came up with a suggestion drawing from Barefoot's way of doing things. And I discussed this with Vikash. He really helped out yesterday. And the concept was, I just picked the preamble. We focused around the preamble. And what we did was first explained the what's sovereign is, what secular is, democratic and stuff. And then we got the kids to say, okay, now imagine this group is a sovereign group. And from within this, there has to be a democratic process. And you pick your own leaders. And from those leaders, basically the concept of republic, then those leaders will have to take the decision for the whole group. And then we said, you have to use these principles of the justice and equality and all of that. And we gave very simple stuff, which was basically saying, you've got 5 days a week. You have to decide what food you're going to eat on each of the 5 days. And the options were, just to make everybody happy, we just said biryani. But the key part there was, what biryani? There's options of mutton, there's vegetarian, there's chicken. We provocatively added pork and beef also. And we also wanted to say that this is a diverse group where there are some people who will eat one or the other and some who will not eat anything. And this really livened the group, and there was a lot of conversation, discussions that happened. So like you were just saying a few minutes ago, the idea is to take all of this to, right, sorry, Dada, the Bengali boys come up with the potato, but sorry, no potato today. But we did say vegetable biryani, so uspe to aa jayega. So this conversation happened, and based on what you said, basically making the constitution easily accessible to everyone and something that everybody should be talking about. So it went well today. I wanted to thank you and the team for it. So thank you.
Excellent.
Thanks.
Okay.
No, I've really, I mean, I feel very privileged to hear this discussion. It's really interesting, and I don't feel able to, to take an active part. But I mean, I have made a couple of points, and that was really interesting to hear about these children rewriting the Indian Constitution. Yeah.
Thanks, Mike. Okay, friends. Let's call it a night. We'll meet up next week.